Welcome, everyone, to the Thursday series. Jon Taylor is here today to continue the topic that he started a few weeks ago. So I'm going to turn it over, Jon.
Thanks, Tammy. So we're going to keep looking at maturity. And like Tammy said before we hit record, if you haven't seen the last one that I did, go back and watch that. Just a thumbnail on that. I've been thinking a lot about the role maturity plays in functional relationships, and I've been wondering, like, how is maturity defined? How is it obtained? Like, what is it? Where does it come from? So that's what we're going to be exploring. And for now, we're going to be looking at different developmental models. And what a developmental model is, it's a theory of how people become who they are from childhood through adulthood. So today, we are going to start with at least in my educational experience, this was like the first developmental model you get exposed to, Erikson. Well, I have to take that back. We all start with Freud so we can appreciate where we came from, and we all say, man, that's weird. I actually might get brave and do an episode on Freud, because I do think there are some parts of his theory and his insights into how people work that we actually still like we're finding those valid. We're finding those useful. It's just Freud's a little bit of a swamp to walk through. So this is the second one, Erikson. And Erikson's model is it's called the psychosocial stages of development. And so just a little background on where he got his model from. He watched his own children. So this isn't a large sample size. This wasn't done with scientific rigor. But as most things, the seedlings of things that grow into really pertinent, helpful ideas in medicine and psychology, it does start with just kind of this colloquial, I'm looking around my world and here's what I see. So he mainly watched his own children, and he developed this theory about how they develop at different stages. So the psychosocial stages for Erikson are, and we're not going to talk about what each of these is in great detail. I'm going to more talk about the implications of his model, what that means for maturity and relationships later on. So he says from about 0 to 18 months, the developmental stage we're in is trust versus mistrust. So this largely has to do, of course, with an infant's relationship with their caregiver. And based on those interactions, largely based on those interactions, you'll develop your quotient of trust versus mistrust. So in Erikson's model, he's not saying if everything goes well, you're 100% trusting. It's a balance that we come to in each of these stages. And the development of the attribute is based on conflict. So you run into problems, you run into discomfort, you run into uncertainty, and how that is resolved between you and your environment, or you and your caregivers, is a drop in the bucket of, in this first stage, trust versus mistrust. The attribute or the outcome that comes out of this first stage is hope. So a lot of these developmental models have to do, or at least Erikson's has to do, with personality development, how we appear, how we operate into adulthood. So this attribute of hope comes out of trust versus mistrust. The second stage, from about 18 months to 3 years, is autonomy versus shame and doubt. So those of you who have children in your life at this age, or who can remember, I've got 2 living at my house. This is all about I can do it. And it's that struggle between how much efficacy do I have in my own environment, how much can I make things happen in my own life, versus how inept am I. So a quick word about this stage. I'm noticing with my 2 youngest kids, when they want to do something, they don't necessarily want me to leave the room. They want me right there, not so I can reach in and do it for them if they start to struggle, but when they reach that frustration point, I'm not getting this, it's not working. There's somebody there to help them navigate it. So the outcome of this, or the attribute that comes out of autonomy versus shame and doubt, is will. My grit, my willpower, my I want. The next phase is an initiative versus guilt, and this is about 3 years to 5 years. Purpose comes out of that. Those two stages. The other night, I was reading some stories with my younger kids before bed, and we were reading a book called A Spring Walk, and it's like blue and white outline drawings. And the story is this grandmother walking her kids through the garden. And then there's these beautiful color illustrations of different flowers and a little like couplet, little poem that goes with each page. And my 3-year-old was very interested in learning all the names of the flowers. So, we'd read the little couplet and then she'd ask, "What is that?" And some of the names of the flowers she didn't struggle with at all. And she could just say, and other names she would struggle with. And then she'd ask me, "How do you say that one?" And I noticed as I was saying it, she wasn't just looking at the page to memorize, what name goes with what flower. She was watching me and looking at how my mouth was forming. She could hear that there were syllables that she was missing, or she could tell like this isn't quite rolling off the tongue like it should. So in these early developmental stages, we learn a lot by modeling. So this whole initiative versus guilt. The initiative for learning was all hers. She was pointing me towards, this is what I'm interested in, the names of the flowers. And at some point, I even stopped reading the little poems on the page because she was directing. She was directing where she wanted her attention to go. So purpose comes out of initiative versus guilt. The sense of purpose in our life. Here's what I'm about. Here's what's important to me. The next stage, industry versus inferiority, from 6 years old to about 11 years old. This is where kids start to get a sense. I know there's things I can do for myself. Now, what can I build out of that? What can I create for myself? Not just on a one-time basis, but overall in my life. So the conflict here is around persistence. The conflict here is around efficacy. And what comes out of industry versus inferiority, Erikson says confidence comes out of that. And then we have identity versus role confusion, 12 to 18, the teenage years. That one makes intuitive sense for a lot of people. Those are turbulent years. There's a lot of idealization. There's a lot of black and white thinking, which is actually important for developing our identity. When we go in on something, we can go all in on it. And you see kids this age go through phases of identity. I'm a skater now. I'm a nerd now. I'm a jock. I'm a rebel, like all sorts of different phases. And it's really important that the child be able to try on their own identity to find what fits them. Now, of course, some of the conflict in identity versus role confusion is with parents, caregivers, and sometimes with society at large. You are becoming the wrong kind of person. This is not what I wanted for you. Successful resolution of this conflict is where the child gets to feel ownership of their identity, even if there is conflict with a parent. So you can see in the work that I do with Enmeshment how this is a phase that we see a lot of the men and women that come to our Enmeshment workshops, they're very unresolved on. Next, we have intimacy versus isolation, and this is ages 18 to 40. You'll see here where Erikson has this, fidelity is what comes out of identity versus role confusion. So you notice fidelity there would not be to peers or a larger group, it would be fidelity to self. I'm loyal to me, I know who I am, I'm a solid person, which I would say later on in relationships, if I'm able to be loyal to me, I'm able to be loyal to the relationships and groups that I commit myself to. So intimacy versus isolation, 18 to 40. This is not the kind of intimacy where we're talking about closeness to a caregiver. This is intimacy of our choosing. So it's not my parents who I'm stuck with, or my siblings who I was born into the family, or even at this age, it's not the kids that I'm friends with down the street because they live close. I'm really starting to go out into my own world, that identity that I've been forming. I'm looking for relationships and people that support or reflect or even contrast that identity. I'm forming my own life. And of course, if all of you can remember, or maybe you're in this stage now, remember what young adult relationships are like, both romantic and friendships. It's fraught with a lot of conflict, uncertainty, and again, it's our tendency towards I draw closer to other people when I'm struggling, versus I can't count on other people. I'm better off alone. So intimacy versus isolation. The the outcome, the attribute that comes out of that is love, according to Erikson. And then about 40 to 65 years old, Erikson says we enter generativity versus stagnation. So for a lot of people, this is the phase of their life where um, they may not be looking as much down the road. What's coming next for me, as they start to reflect on what am I leaving behind? What do I want my legacy to be? And how am I going to form that? So for a lot of people, this is where you have a relationship with your adult children. Um, and you're looking at the transformation from I'm their primary caregiver to now what am I? What is that role going to be? You may have grandchildren. There may even be some like career and legacy issues there. What's the mark I want to leave on the world? And then from 65 to death, Erikson, oh, and care. Care is the attribute that comes out of generativity versus stagnation. And then Erikson says from 65 to death, we have integrity versus despair. And this is an interesting one because all of the other developmental stages, according to Erikson, I see as this active, like, depending on how things come together in this phase, there could be different outcomes. This last phase is looking back in my life. Am I proud? Am I happy? Or am I full of regret and resentment? So this phase is interesting because it's almost like the you've made your bed, now lie in it phase, which is an interesting idea. I tend to be of the opinion that there is no gavel on our life. There is no now you're done with your development and you live with it. Like there's things to be gained or corrected or gotten to in all phases of life. And he says wisdom is the outcome. So some main ideas from the Erikson psychosocial development. You'll notice I use the word conflict a lot. So Erikson's big idea is one of the collision of biology, environment, and relationships. And there is struggle in those. And it's not about, as a parent, it's not about clearing the way for struggle for your child. Successful resolution is not based on the absence of struggle or having struggle in how you resolve this stage is not evidence that there was too much struggle. So struggle is the ingredient, it's the catalyst, not the enemy. And I think that's really helpful as we look at developing maturity outside of these developmental stages. So Erikson has the ages here because I think those are kind of this is the natural time in life when this would happen. My guess is everybody who's on this call right now probably didn't have a resolution in all of these stages that they're feeling great about or that has translated into functionality, total functionality in their adulthood. So that role of struggle is important to keep in mind when you're missing a piece of maturity or you're missing a piece of adult ability. It's not about going to school. It's not about gaining intellectual knowledge. It's about setting up an environment. Again, you have the collision of biology, social relationships, and emotions. It's about setting up an environment that lets you rework that struggle. So, for example, a lot of you, I hope a lot of you, are taking advantage of 12-step support work. Groups of people who are coming together to be volunteers in each other's life and figure some things out. I have yet to work a set of steps that has not created some kind of struggle in me, has not created some kind of dread in me, has not created some kind of heartache in me. It's the mindful and intentional working through later in life that can help us redevelop or renegotiate some of these previous developmental stages. Development is a balance of personality traits. So the functional adult is no more a 100% optimist than the functional adult is 100% the picture of health and never gets sick. So it's not about, again, it's not about the ideal. When you look at these opposing attributes that Erikson talks about, we wouldn't look at the trust stage and say someone who's 100% trusting is all fine. We'd actually look at someone who's 100% trusting. We'd say, where's your discernment? Like, where did that part of you go that could say, maybe let me look into this a little bit more. So again, it's the balance. It's the balance and the functional interplay between these two sides of the coin that makes the functional adult. And Erikson talks about the stages building on the ones before. So you can see, for example, in the development of intimacy versus isolation, trust versus mistrust plays a big role. So if there's an imbalance or a non-functional, I should say a non-functional mixture of trust versus mistrust, you'll have a hard time developing intimacy. You'll have a hard time developing initiative, or sorry, industry and inferiority, that overall idea of, when I do, things happen in my life. If your sense of autonomy is overwhelmed by a sense of shame and inferiority. So often when there's trouble with a specific attribute, it's helpful to look back a few steps in the developmental process, or even back to the very beginning, and build each attribute from the foundation. And I've found in my own adult life, I actually think about this model a lot in my own personal therapy. There are very few issues that I work on that don't go back in some way, like how's the basic trust working, either in the world as a whole. Sometimes it's things from a relationship with a parent or early attachment figures in my life, and sometimes it's just, how do I see the world right now? Is it a fundamental friendly place, or is this a dangerous place where I have to rely on myself? So those are some things to that's the basic primer on Erikson's model. Now, what I think this says about maturity. Maturity comes from facing conflict. I would even say maturity comes from being able to embrace conflict in a functional way. I wouldn't say embrace is the same as running headlong into conflict every time it starts. It's like, sorry, I have a picture of like football and rugby in my mind. Rumor has it, I'd actually have to look at the research, that there's a lower incidence of concussion in rugby where there's not protective equipment, because one of the things they notice with football players, I'm wearing all this padding and I'll use my head like the tip of a missile. In rugby, with no helmet, no padding, there's a little more of a Weiss protection. So in getting into the conflict and welcoming conflict, it's not that idea of everything is hard and I become stronger by going through everything hard. It's the idea of, what is this struggle? What is this conflict all about? What could I learn here? Or even, what's the kind of challenge I need in my life right now? I remember in my early days of recovery, trying to address my high levels of mistrust. The challenge I needed was to allow a sponsor and allow a therapist into my life, and work on opening up vulnerability, working on taking risks, so that I could have a chance to renegotiate my relationship with trust. Another thing that I see from these models is complexity is part of the maturity cocktail, I would say. So I see in Erikson's model the development of the next phase based on the resolution of the phase before. So for example, we probably all learned from our earliest preschool days that sharing is important. In adulthood, I don't think sharing has ever become not important. We share in more complex ways, and the modes of sharing and the stakes for sharing are harder as we go along, more complex as we go along. But that basic idea of, it is nice to share, it's a good idea to share, is there. So one of the markers, I would say, for unresolved trauma is a resistance of complexity. And that's not about somebody being fragile or being a baby. I would say neurologically, if I'm having to constantly have a bunch of defenses up, there's a lot of brain energy, emotional bandwidth that I'm using to keep myself safe because threat is everywhere all the time. And so there's not a lot left over to handle complexity or intricacy. So the allowance, again, of struggle, the allowance of it's not black and white, those are some of the challenges that we set up in each of our developmental tasks that I think help builds maturity. Another part of maturity is, I think, being able to accept and see how our social surroundings dictate to a large degree how we engage with developmental challenges. So, for example, my almost 12-year-old son played flag football again this fall, and he had the same coach and about half the same team that he had the year before, which we were thrilled about. And we would watch how his coach structured their team versus how some other teams in the league and their coaches structured the team. There were some teams that were very clearly about, these are our best players, so we're going to keep them on the field as much as possible, and the rest of you can kind of do whatever you want to do. Our coach, it was everybody was expected to play quarterback at some point. And if you wanted to play a little bit more, you could play a little bit more. And if you didn't want to play quarterback at all, you could say so. But his team structure was more one of, we're all here to learn and we're all here to improve. So there were some kids on the team that were by far better quarterbacks than other kids on the team. But the social surrounding was one of support. We're all a team. You know, we're here to do this together. So when you'd have one of the less experienced or less skilled quarterbacks throw a pass that didn't make it anywhere near the receiver or was picked off, there was no disappointment from the coach. Good try. You'd hear him on the sideline. You know, next time watch for this, or he'd even work with the receivers. Hey, you got to know your quarterback. It was this environment of, we're all here to learn, we're all here to grow. So in maturity, we recognize the importance of the right social systems, and we don't take just what's given us. We seek out systems that help us learn, grow, maybe even challenge us. So the technical term from Erikson's model is it's epigenetic, meaning the context of our community plays a big role in what gets expressed inside of us. So if you're struggling in your coupleship, ask yourself, how many happy couples are we friends with? How many recovering couples are we friends with that are figuring things out? If you're struggling in your own recovery, you might look around your support network, your 12-step group, if you have one, hint, hint, and you would ask yourself, are there people in this room I want to grow up to be like? If not, if my group is perpetually struggling with sobriety, or my group is perpetually struggling with no one gets traction here, I might want to look at changing my social environment, because that'll play a big role in how I experience my own challenges and what's available to me to learn from challenges. Again, when I think about my daughter watching my lips as I said the names of these flowers, models, people that I can watch, I can learn from. In adulthood, here's another thing about maturity. In adulthood, we do have the ability to recognize that we have deficits. We don't have to be impervious in adulthood. For some of us, it's more scary than others to admit I struggle in this way. But in adulthood, we can admit those struggles, and we can pick attributes or skills one at a time that I want to work on. Again, I want to work on my trust. I want to work on my sense of efficacy, my industry versus inferiority. And we can ask, we can learn, again, from people who have gone before and supporting us, like, how do you get a sense of self-worth? How do you get a sense of what I do matters? And we can focus on those things one at a time and accept that there's challenge in that and that we're going to fail. And we can work consistently to develop things that we need. We can recognize in adulthood, part of maturity is recognizing that growth comes through conflict, not knowledge alone. So if you want a competency, you're going to have to work for it. And that means failing. That means finding models. That means trial and error. And it also means some formal instruction. So it's not all about, you can't learn anything from books, just go get it in the real world. Again, it's this complexity, it's this mixture. So I think maturity is being able to accept when we fall short of our own expectations, or we fall short of what feels functional, and getting to work on that. Being able initially to accept the defeat or accept the failure, and use that as a springboard for growth. Maturity is focusing on an internal experience. So how am I set up to do this versus what's the outcome? Again, as I was watching my daughter learn flower names, she wasn't focused on the page. She was focused on me. She was listening to how I was saying things. She was listening to or she was feeling how her mouth was working. Is it making the sounds that I want it to make? So a lot of Erikson's model doesn't have to do with what we produce. It has to do with what we become and how we get there. So I'll just give one example of this, like one at a time, focusing on how it feels versus what I'm going to do. I was meeting with a couple a little while ago who it's strange when you get to know your clients, and as I especially notice this with couples, I often don't have to look or hear what's going on in the waiting room. When I hear them walk in the door, I usually have some idea of how they're doing. So this couple that has historically been through struggle and they've had a lot of difficulty. They walked in and I could feel they're in a different place. And sure enough, I come out and they look like they're in a different place, and they sit down and there's very little tension. And so I asked them, I said, what have you two been thinking about? What have you two been focusing on the last few weeks? Because you feel different today. And they said, this has been one of our best stretches ever. And he spoke up and he said, my main thing that I'm focusing on is I want to focus on her feeling like she has my support. And I said to him, so what has that changed for you? And he said, well, I noticed that when we're talking, I'm monitoring my own thoughts less, and I'm more looking at my spouse for signs of distress. And I'm trying to be careful with my words, but I'm also not overthinking it. So if I say something or do something that doesn't hit the mark, I'm correcting more immediately. And she reached out and grabbed his hand and she said, I can feel that. Thank you. So a little vignette there of these bigger ideas we've been talking about, this maturity. I know where I struggle. I can focus on one thing at a time, and I'm willing to fail. And they actually, lest you think that it was all sunshine and roses, they actually talked about a difficult moment that they had through that week, but they were both greeting it with curiosity. They were both greeting it with the ability and the willingness to take feedback from one another. Let me hear your experience, versus this like drawn in and self-protective thing. So that's probably enough about development maturity from the Eriksonian perspective.
Great stuff. And of course, you've got me, but yes, the couple had a difficult, there was more to it, but you sensed the energy was different, right from the get-go. They were in a different place. And so, a difficult situation had not completely derailed everything that they, had done. And I think that that's what, as I'm listening to all this, it's like everything builds on, like we have opportunities to build. I wrote a blog. I like to hike. You bike. I hike. But I hiked the Grand Canyon, and I shared, the photo of the path, and it was hard, in many places, and but I did it, and I was never alone. There was support along the way, and I was like, wow, this is the analogy of my recovery life is, and then there's this amazing, beautiful vista. So there are moments when you're just like, overwhelmed with, wow, and and then you're going like, and now I got to go up to another, part of the path, so I look at all of this as that when you were talking about if I can remind, focusing on the internal experience rather than the external. And I thought, wow, it's so easy to get caught up in, I'm looking for outside validation. I mean, that's what addiction is. I'm looking for something external to help me feel okay, so learning to do things for the reason of I want to better myself. You were talking about attributes, and And one of the things that was really key, I've never been a patient person. And so I had accepted that I'm not a patient person. And a dear friend who I trust and value, I was kind of, glib about it. And she said, "You are patient. You're just not tapping into it."
Mm.
Changed everything. Because I was like, my opportunity for this is to learn to tap into something that I have, but I'm overlooking it. And that was a moment for me, and it really shifted things. I no longer say I have no patience. I go, I have patience. I just have to work a little harder to, to navigate that attribute. So when you were talking about these stages, I'm curious, and you may not know the answer to this, but like, where do you see, or where does he or whatever see people getting stuck? Because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like if you got stuck in the 3 to 5 year old or even younger, like you would have no language for, you'd have no ability. So, then you're coming at it as an adult if you get the awareness and opportunity to go back and look at these things that were very, very young child.
Yeah, yeah, I would say the stuckness is it's like that old David Foster Wallace parable, and I think I've said it a million times here. The old fish is swimming through the pond. The two young fish come by, and the old fish says, "Hey guys, how's the water?" And the two young fish keep swimming. They turn to each other and say, "What's water?"
Yeah.
I think the stuckness is when my environment is all one thing. So think about the trust versus mistrust when you have an unresponsive, unemotionally attuned caregiver. There is no concept of people could be reliable. So the stuckness is a world that is all one shade. I don't even think in terms of here's what I could do because my world was so colored by frustration. My initiative was punished. I wasn't given chances to learn. I had hovering, anxious parents, or I was punished so severely for failure. It's like, why try? So the stuckness is not realizing there's a larger context that we swim in and there's more possibility. This is where models, I think, are really, really helpful. This is where recovery community is really, really helpful. Because you may hear people share. I remember, for example, Tammy, you know Carver Brown, right?
Oh yeah.
I remember Carver sharing an experience in his Back to Basics uh, class where he listened to some like speaker meetings podcasts, and he heard somebody talking about this really really rough childhood. It was old, not very quality audio, and he's like, "Man, that was really rough." And yet, like this story is somehow familiar. Who is this? And he does research. It was a recording of him from several years before, telling his story. And through the work he'd been doing on himself and in his recovery, he said, "I believe that the healing in the present can retroactively heal the past." And he said, "It took me realizing that was me to say, oh yeah, my past was hard, and my relationship with my dad was hard." And being able to see that like he had all sorts of compassion and love and self-acceptance and things that helped him not live in that. Um, so the stuckness is I would say the absence of choice. The
Mm.
stuckness is the absence of recognition. Things could be another way. And that often takes this like leap of faith. So you're telling me that I should walk up to this stranger in a meeting and say, "Will you help me? Will you be my sponsor?" And I've been able to trust nobody in my life. Yeah, fat chance. We don't start to see the variations until we start to take risks. Yeah.
Well, and you bring up the 12 steps, and I thought, we're how often do we hear people like not doing step 4? Because, and I know it's, like it's fear. I know steps, 4 through 9 are the house cleaning steps, and lots of people, you know dawdle at 1, 2, and 3. Oh, I'm on steps 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and the most important step for me was step 4, like getting, like, it was such a freedom to be willing to do that and share it with, but you do them one at a time, and I have often thought, for my own personal life, when things are going pretty good, like, yeah, I'm not coasting, but I'm not as into things, and I'm not having to work as hard on myself, as when stuff is happening. And I've had something recently, and my husband, like you're talking about with this couple, my husband said, "You're better." And I was like, I am, there had been the shift, like I've been going through this thing, and and he could see it, like, and I was like, yeah, but I've been leaning into every single recovery thing I could possibly do, and I wasn't in danger of acting out or anything, but I just wasn't comfortable. Like I wasn't on my little serenity beam and all of this kind of stuff. And so it's worth the struggle, and I think I'm in a different place. And like you're talking about, it's like, it's elevated from the standpoint of I won't have to go through that particular thing again, so I'm grateful for that. So those of you joining, I'm going to I'm going to tag on 12 steps, really important, and do the steps. Like just warming a seat in the meetings, lovely, social, good. You'll learn some things, but it's really doing the work. When he was talking about Carver Brown, back to basics is like when newcomers came to AA, it was the founding one, they would sit down with a newcomer and they do all the steps like in that one moment, and then they'd go do it again and do it again. So it wasn't like, oh, I need to take a year to do my 4 step. No, you do it, and then you do it again because somebody's going to say something. You go, I hadn't thought of that should have been in my 4 step, and guess what, they stayed in recovery, they stayed on a path, and they were helping other people and making connections. So the people,
I'll
go
say
ahead, go ahead.
if you're struggling to get your teeth into a 12-step process or feel a part of the community, Carver actually has his Back to Basics lectures on YouTube. So you can
I
search for
will
Carver
dig
Brown
that
Back
out
to Basics.
when John's answering the question, and I'll put it on I will
Yeah.
find the link and put it in the chat. So
It's
12 step, life
powerful.
changing.
It's powerful. His Back to Basics program is really powerful, and he is one of the most entertaining presenters I've
He's
ever seen.
Yeah. Well, and he's got a lovely Southern accent, which, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. There's that. Okay. So, John, I'm the betrayed sexual February 22nd and familial 12 of 12 or 2012. We are separated since 11/1. He goes to my parents' house after putting kids to bed. He stonewalled me for 3 weeks, so I did not go on vacation with him and our kids. His parents were a major part of the conflict that led to Stonewall. I told him his parents may not be around the kids until resolved. Midweek, our kids told me that his parents were there. He thought it was okay because he invited them up to talk through things. I did some kind of, I did something kind, so he started talking to me 11/25 after 7 weeks of stonewalling. Last week was his birthday. Rather than coming home after work as usual without communicating a change in plans to me, he went to dinner with his parents. I'd picked up ingredients for a favorite dinner to have at home, and one of our kids baked a cake for him. I'm disgusted. It feels like his parents are the other woman. He vehemently rejects the notion of being enmeshed. Is there any hope for working through this? Wow, that's a challenging one.
Yeah, that's really, really challenging.
Mhm.
That last question, is there hope for working through this? Of course, if um, there has to be a shift in perspective or a willingness to entertain something other than the way that I'm functioning right now. So again, when you look back on these developmental stages that we're talking about here, when we talk about the balance, we talk about the acceptance of conflict. Um, as a marriage therapist, I recognize the value of setting people up to struggle, not setting people up to fail, but like having them face the struggle without any reality distortion. So in Dr. Adams' book, When He's Married to Mom, I believe it's chapter 6, maybe chapter 8, is written for spouses of men who are struggling with enmeshment. And he has some strategies for if my partner doesn't see it. And the sum total of it is, how do I want to say this? Um, to get the hope rolling, you're going to have to present him with a struggle. You're going to have to present him with a conflict. which is something like, and I've actually done consultations with couples in this position where, you know, she traditionally feels like, I'm really clear on this, I want you to look at this, and he says, can't be. And I always ask this question, have you read the things that she's reading? Or are you looking at the same sources of information? And like 100% of the time with these guys, the answer is no, I'm not. And I'll say to them, don't you think it could help level the playing field? You could at least have an intelligible debate if you don't agree, if you're looking at the same sources. And for the partner, for you in this case, I think it's really important to, again, set up that challenge. I need you to take a closer look at your relationship with your parents, and I need you to work some things out. I want you to get in therapy for it. And I need to see some improvement within 6 months or whatever time frame you can set. I need to see some changes, and I'd get specific here. I feel like you put me second. I feel like your parents are your most important relationship, and that sucks for me. So I'd like to see some improvement, or I'll need to be looking at a different arrangement in our relationship. Now that hinges on you being ready to do something different. Don't give an empty threat. Give a clear choice. And so I would say from where you're at right now, that's where it starts. I would like you to. I've read this book or I've looked at this material. I want you to do the same. I need you to take a look at this, a serious look at this. I don't want you to argue with me about it, but take a look on your own, see what you think is there, and let's reevaluate after a little while. But it's hard. I won't get into it totally here. That putting the parents ahead of the spouse, while it feels like, and it is, an intense form of betrayal, the genesis of that is developmental trauma. It's a form of abuse where a person feels like it's that life or death. I've got to have my parents on top of the pile. So I say that not to excuse any behavior, but to contextualize. We're looking at something much deeper than a choice. We're looking at something much deeper than a lack of consideration. So it takes a heavy hammer swung in the right way at the right point to get these really entrenched dynamics and traumas and feelings to get them moving. So you know that approach that I just outlined there, again, it's not meant to create fear. It's this real targeted, this dynamic, this amount of time. I'd like to see a change.
And I agree, and I appreciate that you shared that was a healthy boundary. It's like this is the time frame. This is, and even I would like to see a change, and it may be, and here are some things that would be perceived as a change to me,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just like with all due respect, and this is not a criticism, but when I read, I told him his parents may not be around the kids until result. He he did it anyway, you know. So there was no, if you choose to have your parents around the children, then the children won't be with you, or whatever it is. I'm making that up, but you know, when you were talking too about like, you know, it's like it feels like it's a choice, you know, or that this is so heavy for the enmeshed man. The parents, I mean, there's so much pressure. It, you know, it's the whole dynamic. It isn't just like, well, I don't think I can, you know, can separate away from this. It's like the parents will be or, you know, or one or the other will be enforcing and reinforcing that message. So it is a very closed system, and you know, and but it does feel like he's choosing his parents over his wife and children, you know, like when you're looking at it in black and white, but it's so much more complex than that. So so the healthy boundaries, and like Jon said, you know, Dr. Rob says this all the time, don't threaten divorce if you're not willing to follow through. Every addict will know that, oh, you say that, but we can manipulate around you. So it has to be, and this is where I'd so encourage you to get the support you need, you know, to work on that. And I'll tag on, Debbie McCrae is going to be doing a boundaries online work group starting, I think, January 20th. I don't have it posted yet, but that'll be internal boundaries and external boundaries, because it's such a complicated thing. It's not punishment, it's not control. It's like, what are the needs, and setting it up very calmly. This is, you know, this is what I'm looking for. This is the time frame, whatever, and this is the consequence if you're unable to hold to this. And I think that that course is going to be super helpful for people, to get kind of a framework for what they need for their boundaries.
I'll say one more thing on this in that idea of like struggle, conflict, being part of what creates maturity in us. Successful boundaries or healthy boundaries create struggle for both parties. And so I have yet to see in a coupleship or in individuals, I have yet to see a betrayed partner go through recovery and come out on the other end saying, I'm healthy and I'm happy now, without them going through a big transformation too. So when I use the word maturity, that's not to imply that we're starting with like tons of immaturity. This is a childish person. Successful recovery, I think, makes us confront complexity, makes us confront hard emotions. And if you let yourself rise to the challenge too, there actually could be a point at which this relationship isn't tenable. I got to find my own line, be able to hold that. That's just as hard for you as it is for the person on the other end. So when we have the right kind of challenge, or we have challenge going on in a relationship, outcomes are better because people are forced to grow either into it or out of it. Does that make sense?
It does. And I would like you to speak to, I'm disgusted. It feels like his parents are the other woman. He vehemently rejects the notion of enmeshment. And yes, I appreciate that, but like I have this vision of like, you're enmeshed with your parents, and like, like the more you're being confronted,
I,
like, and as an addict, and more I'm confronted with a message, like the more likely I am to go, "Mm."
I was working with a couple the other day, and I actually had to jump in on her because she, not from a bad place, but there was some dynamic, some problem going on. She said, "See, that's the enmeshment," and I said, "I got to stop you right there. Like, what does that even mean? And what are you trying to accomplish with that?" Because to hear that from the outside and from his lived experience, to say that's the enmeshment, number one, is not really defined, and number two, like, that makes it feel like I've just committed the crime of the century. Which when we understand the underpinnings of enmeshment, is it's not a crime I'm committing. It's a deep, deep wound that I continue to transgress in. So don't get me wrong, there is personal responsibility. But when I talk to these guys, and I have a lot of guys who are like, I don't, what does enmeshment even mean? I don't see it. And I'll ask them, well, think about this. Who do you become when your parents have a demand from you? And often there's this light bulb, oh, I don't feel confident and I don't feel grown up. I feel like a little boy again. And I'll say to them, do you see that going well for you long term? If that dynamic doesn't change, if you're stuck feeling that way, do you see that going well for you long term? And the vast majority of the time I'll hear from guys, no, I don't see that going well long term. It doesn't feel good to me. So you have to be able to allow for some breathing room. You have to be able to allow for some space for the ideas, and again the conflict, the grinding of the gears, to be felt.
Okay, the next question. Can you speak about childhood emotional neglect combined with enmeshment and resulting empathy deficits, lack of accountability, and rage, specifically eroticized rage? Also, if someone in this position has not been able to make progress, small periods of awareness, but stuck in denial, dissociation, distraction, what would be the most effective treatment? Already facing the pain of divorce process, losing family, but stuck in blame instead of facing consequences. I'm the grieving partner.
So if I'll go back to the scaffolding of these this developmental model we talked about today. So emotional attunement is the foundation of how trust is built. It's not like when we're infants, we don't think, oh, mom and dad said this verbally and they did it, good, I can trust them. It's more this it's the nature of, when you look at me, are you really looking at me? Are you there? Or is it hollow? Or do I not get your eyes at all? So I don't know your emotional state. I can't intuit that. I can't resonate with that. Um, so when there's emotional neglect, there's an absence of emotional attunement. You're going to get a child who can't understand their own emotional world. So kids start to understand about themselves when themselves is reflected in their attuned caregiver. So when I'm sad and my adult caregiver says, "You're so sad," that's what starts to get form. Or, when I'm a little clown and somebody says, "You're funny," and they laugh genuinely, there's this like reflection. Oh, you're a good friend, you're kind. Like that sense of self is formed from the outside in, and then it's really owned from the inside out. So those messages and that reflection starts early on. And if there's not reflection in certain areas, emotionally, socially, um, there's a void there in that kid. So empathy, and honestly, the beginning of this question, I can't answer it how you're asking, because I don't know that this tracks. This is a salad of different issues that are important, but I don't know that they're all tied together, and I don't know that they're all a result of emotional neglect. I'll say that. So again, accountability is hard, and management of emotions, anger as well, is hard when there's not that template of attunement early on, when there's not an internal dialogue about what's going on inside of me that we learn again from the outside in. So yeah, therapy, what individual therapy provides is an attuned caregiving place that is focused on the emotional experience. There starts to be some kind of reflection and ownership. I'll say with Enmeshment as well, struggles with empathy and accountability are most often related to the lack of ownership of self, meaning I don't even feel like I'm an individual. I'm a raw nerve, stimulus response. So what I'll see with Enmesh guys as we develop more of their own agency, as we develop more of their own efficacy in their life, we start to see them being able to choose things like empathy and accountability, because stepping forward empathetically and accountably is not necessarily like a one-to-one. Whenever I do this, everything's great. It's like this complex. I'm going to step forward and it's going to be difficult, but I can think about the long term and I can reflect back on what that's going to give me. And so then I can do it. So individual therapy is the thing here when those elements are lacking, and it's individual therapy with a therapist who is willing to emotionally attune and go to various feeling states with you, and help you track yourself, versus we're teaching concrete skills. The skills only help if the internal scaffolding is present.
And I'm going to share, we have a residential treatment program. We get a lot of guys who have stopped the problematic behavior, but are completely stuck and not know how to move forward in any kind of way. And so we're looking holistically at the underlying issues and working through them to a degree. I mean, like this is a lifelong journey, but, and having a plan and the support to be successful with it, after that. So for someone who is stuck, even when they're losing everything, if they actually want change, not everybody does, but if they do, that would be Seeking Integrity in Los Angeles. We'd be happy to help. This is a great question because I've had
Yeah.
people ask this before. I am a 65-year-old man and I'm told that I am enmeshed with my family, but my parents have been dead for 15 years. Is this possible?
Yes, yes, you represent like one to two guys every enmeshment workshop that I do. This is the story. My parents have been gone for a while, or even I've been separated, I haven't seen them for a long time. How could I still be enmeshed? So enmeshment is not a description, at least in the way that Dr. Adams talks about when we talk about mother enmeshment. It's not a description of a relationship structure alone. It's an internal ordering of my belief system. So your parent actually doesn't have to be present. They don't have to be living for you to operate on the belief system, loyalty to family above all else. Performance is how I get love. I was actually, this is a few years ago, there was a guy in the workshop that I think was pushing 80. His mother had been dead for close to 40 years. And he was reflecting during one of our exercises, and he said, I still think in terms of every decision I make, how would mom feel about this?
Wow.
So enmeshment is not a description of the relationship arrangement. It's an internal set of beliefs. Is the voice inside me my own, or is it my parents? Do I operate on a set of beliefs and attitudes and values that I've vetted for myself and I've decided this is best for me? Or do I operate on this because that's what my parents did and they told me this is the only right way, or they showed me I'll be so disappointed if you don't. So even with everybody who comes in the workshop, if your parents are still alive, we're still working on it's your belief system. It's that internal shift. I'm my own person, um, that can give himself through commitment to relationships that he chooses, not I'm along for the ride everywhere, that I have to go. So it's looking at the initial relationship with parents, because that's where the belief system is formed. That's where our first reflection of ourself comes from. If your parent was needy or demanding for your attention or loyalty, it's going to be really hard for you to develop an independent sense of self. Because when we're teeny tiny, we rely on our parents for survival. So we don't cross them easily when we're little. And if they don't leave room for us to grow as a person, because they're not developed enough themselves and they need to take from us, we don't develop that sense of personhood and individuality, and that commitment and fidelity and loyalty later on in life are a struggle, because the primary loyalty still lies with parents, even when they're in the ground.
And I'm going to ask this question. I don't know if you have enough time to answer it, but I'm like, okay, so now, so an enmeshed parent of children. So now it's the grandchildren of what is the typical effect on those children?
It depends. Some families, it really is a like everybody's got to be a part of this. I had one client that I worked in. He said, my grandma's like a mafia don, and I think her ethos for the family is blood in, blood out. Like if you are
Mm.
my blood, I control all of you. And for some enmeshed people, it's really just like you're my baby boy, and grandma might even see the kids as competition. So it
Oh,
really kind of
wow.
depends on, again, the big belief system in the family. I've seen some grandkids of enmeshing parents who will say, I don't like to be around grandma because she's weird, or it
Mm.
doesn't feel good. And if grandma is primarily focused about her baby boy or her baby girl, she won't pull the guilt on the grandkids specifically. She will say to the kid, your kids don't talk to me, or why don't they come around? But it's more a message for him as the grandkids. So it
Oh,
just depends on how the
interesting.
family's ordered.
Okay. We got you. You answered that one. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. Watch the schedule because there's some differences with the holidays. So pay attention to the calendar on our site. Check out Carver Brown's stuff. I haven't talked to him in ages, so I'll go listen to his YouTube. So thanks, John. Take care,
Bye.
everybody.